Today we're talking about something wild. 5 wrestlers that Chris Jericho absolutely hated. Each of these feuds came from some seriously crazy moments. From real-life tension backstage to heated fights that almost got physical, Jericho's had his fair share of enemies over the years. So let's jump right in and see what really went down between Jericho and these wrestlers he just couldn't get along with. Shawn Michaels. Jericho had always idolized Shawn Michaels growing up. He patterned his style after him. The flashy moves, the charisma, the show-stealing performances. But when Jericho returned to WWE in the early 2000s, he realized that being compared to his childhood hero wasn't praise anymore. It was an insult. He didn't want to be the next Shawn Michaels. He wanted to be better than Shawn Michaels. Their first major collision came in 2003. Jericho made it clear that he believed Michaels had become a washed-up veteran clinging to the spotlight, while Jericho was the future. The tension boiled over at WrestleMania 99, where they put on a wrestling masterpiece, a blend of athleticism, emotion, and storytelling that fans still talk about today. Jericho lost that match, but the story didn't end there. After the final bell, they shared a heartfelt embrace, and then Jericho kicked Michaels low, turning admiration into contempt in one brutal moment. Fast forward to 2008, their rivalry reignited, but this time it was darker, more personal, and shockingly real. Jericho accused Michaels of being a liar and manipulator, claiming HBK faked an injury to win matches. Things escalated when Jericho accidentally punched Michaels' wife, Rebecca, during a confrontation on Raw. That wasn't part of the script. Jericho actually broke her lip, and it sent the feud into overdrive. The two went to war in a brutal, unsanctioned match at Unforgiven 2008, where Jericho's aggression reached a new level. Later that same night, he went on to win the World Heavyweight Championship, making him one of WWE's top villains. Their rivalry culminated in a legendary ladder match at No Mercy, closing their chapter with blood, emotion, and mutual respect. Kevin Owens. If you've ever wanted to see a friendship burn to the ground in front of millions, look no further than Chris Jericho's feud with Kevin Owens. What started as one of the most entertaining partnerships in modern WWE history turned into one of the most heartbreaking betrayals fans had seen in years. When Jericho returned to WWE in 2016, he wasn't exactly the same loudmouth rock star fans remembered. He was funnier, cockier, and more self-aware, walking around calling everyone stupid idiots and carrying his famous list of Jericho. Around that time, Kevin Owens was the brash new Universal Champion, a man who didn't trust anyone. But somehow these two clicked. Their chemistry was instant. On the mic, in the ring, even in their backstage skits. They became the ultimate odd couple. Owens was cold and serious. Jericho was loud and ridiculous. Together they were gold. For months, they dominated WWE programming. Jericho helped Owens retain his Universal title, interfered in matches, and took beatings for his best friend. Fans loved every bit of their bromance, their inside jokes, their matching scarves, their goofy celebrations. Jericho even called it the Festival of Friendship, a huge in-ring celebration to honor Owens and their bond. But then came that moment, one that every fan still remembers vividly. Owens presented Jericho with a small red gift box during the Festival of Friendship. Inside, a new list. But this one wasn't the list of Jericho. It was the list of KO, and the only name written on it was Chris Jericho. That silent realization on Jericho's face, the heartbreak, the confusion, and the betrayal became one of the most powerful moments in WWE storytelling. Owens brutally attacked him moments later, smashing him through a TV screen and ending their friendship in cold blood. Their feud carried into WrestleMania 33, where Jericho fought Owens for the United States Championship in an emotional, revenge-driven showdown. While Owens won, the real story was Jericho's evolution, from the clownish sidekick to the betrayed veteran whose heart had been ripped out on live TV. Jericho later called this storyline one of his favorites ever, and for good reason. It wasn't just wrestling, it was drama, comedy, emotion, and pain rolled into one. Fans laughed with them, then cried when it all fell apart. Rey Mysterio. Rey Mysterio stood for honor, respect, and the underdog spirit. Chris Jericho, on the other hand, was at his most arrogant and manipulative, a man who believed he was smarter and better than everyone else, especially the fans. Their feud began in 2009 during one of Jericho's most brilliant heel runs. He had reinvented himself from the loud rock star-like showman into a cold, bitter intellectual who looked down on everyone around him. Gone were the catchphrases and jokes. This was a darker, sharper Jericho who wore suits, spoke slowly and condescendingly, and called himself the best in the world at what I do. Rey Mysterio, meanwhile, was riding high as the Intercontinental Champion, adored by fans all over the world. Naturally, Jericho took aim at him. From the very start, Jericho mocked Rey's size, his style, and most of all, his mask. To Jericho, that mask wasn't a symbol of tradition, it was a weakness. He claimed Rey was hiding behind it, using it to avoid facing who he really was. The rivalry quickly became personal, and their matches were nothing short of classics. Their battles at Judgment Day, Extreme Rules, and The Bash in 2009 showcased some of the best storytelling of that era. Each match was fast-paced, creative, and filled with near falls that had the crowd on the edge of their seats. But what made it unforgettable was Jericho's mind games. In one of the most shocking moments in WWE history, during their match at Extreme Rules, Jericho managed to unmask Rey Mysterio mid-match, something almost sacred in lucha libre culture. For fans, that was like crossing a line you never touch. Jericho didn't just want to beat Rey, he wanted to humiliate him. He taunted him for weeks, holding the unmasking moment over Rey's head. But Mysterio wasn't done. At the Bash 2009, Rey put everything on the line. His mask against Jericho's Intercontinental Championship. In a thrilling, emotional showdown, Rey pulled off the impossible. He reclaimed his honor, outsmarted Jericho, and pinned him clean in the middle of the ring to regain the title. It was a fitting end to one of the most intense, story-driven rivalries either man ever had. The chemistry between them was incredible. Jericho's technical brilliance meshed perfectly with Rey's high-flying artistry. But beyond the moves and the matches, what made this feud special was its emotional depth. It was about pride, identity, and the struggle between respect and arrogance. In interviews years later, Jericho called Rey one of his favorite opponents, praising his creativity and professionalism. But during that 2009 run, Jericho made fans truly hate him. And that's exactly what he wanted. He turned the crowd's love for Rey into fuel for his own villainy, proving once again why he's one of the best storytellers in wrestling history. The Jericho-Mysterio rivalry wasn't about blood or betrayal, it was about beliefs. Jericho believed he could expose Rey as a fraud, but in the end, Rey exposed Jericho's ego instead. It was one of those rare feuds where both men came out looking like legends, because they were. Kevin Omega. When Chris Jericho showed up in New Japan Pro Wrestling to confront Kenny Omega in late 2017, the wrestling world collectively lost its mind. No one saw it coming. Jericho was a lifelong WWE guy, a loyal company man who'd spent nearly 2 decades under Vince McMahon's banner. Kenny Omega, on the other hand, was the face of NJPW's modern era, the self-proclaimed best bout machine, leader of the elite, and the top foreign star in Japan. So, when Jericho's video appeared on the big screen at the end of one of Omega's matches, calling him out for Wrestle Kingdom 12, it wasn't just a dream match. It was a moment that changed wrestling history. At first, fans didn't believe it was real, but it was. The Alpha versus Omega showdown was officially on. What made it so captivating was how real the tension felt. Jericho, in his mid-40s at the time, had nothing left to prove, or so everyone thought. But Jericho wasn't ready to be a nostalgia act. He wanted to reinvent himself again, and taking on Omega in Japan was the boldest way to do it. Jericho played the perfect villain, brash, brutal, and disrespectful. He called Omega overrated, insulted Japanese fans, and promised to end the hype once and for all. Kenny, cool and confident, saw Jericho as an outsider trying to steal his spotlight. It was more than a match. It was a clash of generations. A war between the old guard and the new wave. Their match at Wrestle Kingdom 12 in January 2018 delivered on every bit of that hype. It was wild, violent, and storytelling at its finest. Jericho, showing a mean streak fans hadn't seen in years, turned the ring into chaos, using chairs, tables, and pure aggression. Omega fought back with his trademark precision and athleticism. Every move felt huge. Every near fall made the crowd gasp. In the end, Omega picked up the win, but Jericho walked away looking just as strong, proving he could hang with the very best in the world, even outside WWE. But the story didn't end there. The chemistry between Jericho and Omega was too good for just one match. Jericho returned to NJPW later that year, attacking Omega again, this time in shocking fashion after Omega's victory over Kazuchika Okada. It set up another brutal encounter at Dominion 2019, but this time, Jericho came out on top, defeating Omega in another hard-hitting war. What made this feud truly legendary was what it represented. This wasn't just two wrestlers fighting, it was a turning point for the entire industry. When AEW was officially launched in 2019, both Jericho and Omega were at the heart of it. Their rivalry became one of the company's cornerstones, culminating in another classic showdown at AEW Double or Nothing 2019, where Jericho defeated Omega to become AEW's first ever world champion contender. For Jericho, it was proof that he could reinvent himself anywhere, anytime, against anyone. For Omega, it was a test of whether he could truly stand toe-to-toe with one of the greatest ever. Together, they delivered magic, not just in the ring, but in shaping the modern wrestling landscape. In the years since, Jericho has openly said his feud with Omega reignited his passion for wrestling. It gave him new creative freedom, new energy, and a whole new chapter in his career. And for fans, it gave us something unforgettable. The moment when two of the best in the world collided and wrestling changed forever. Dean Malenko. The feud between Chris Jericho and Dean Malenko in WCW was a masterclass in character work and storytelling. A perfect blend of comedy, arrogance, and pure wrestling skill. It wasn't about world titles or blood feuds. It was about ego and Jericho's talent for turning even the quietest rival into a powerful story. In 1998, Dean Malenko was known as the Man of 1,000 Holds. He wasn't flashy or loud. He was a calm, technical genius, respected by fans and feared by opponents. Chris Jericho, on the other hand, was his polar opposite, loud, flamboyant, and desperate for attention. He decided the best way to make his name was to mock Malenko endlessly. That's where the magic began. Jericho bragged that he wasn't just as good as Malenko, he was better. Not the man of 1,000 holds, but the man of 1,004 holds. On live TV, Jericho unrolled a long sheet of paper and began reading out his list of holds, mixing real wrestling moves with nonsense like armbar, which he repeated dozens of times for laughs. The segment became one of the most famous promos of his WCW career. But the comedy soon turned serious. Jericho constantly taunted Malenko, calling him a loser after matches and even insulting his late father. When Malenko disappeared from TV, Jericho mocked him every week, until Malenko finally returned, disguised under a mask at Slamboree 1998. When he unmasked and attacked Jericho, the crowd erupted. Their feud turned Jericho into one of WCW's most entertaining villains and gave Malenko one of the biggest reactions of his career. It was classic wrestling storytelling. Simple, funny, emotional, and unforgettable, all built on Jericho's perfect blend of disrespect and charisma. And that's a wrap for today's video. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss an update. See you next time. Bye. You won't believe this, but there are 5 tag teams that absolutely hated the Wild Samoans. And trust me, these rivalries were some of the most intense battles you'll ever hear about. So sit back and get ready, because we're jumping in. Starting off strong, we've got Rocky Johnson and Tony Atlas, better known as the Soul Patrol. This feud with the Wild Samoans wasn't just a big rivalry in the WWF. It was also one of the most historically significant battles in tag team wrestling. The Wild Samoans, Afa and Sika, were already well established by the early 80s. With their wild, unpredictable style, and that untamed, savage aura they carried to the ring, they were unlike anything the WWF audience had seen before. Managed by the legendary Captain Lou Albano, they were ruthless, chaotic, and dangerous, and that made them the perfect villains. On the other hand, you had Rocky Johnson and Tony Atlas, two charismatic, powerhouse athletes who had the speed, strength, and determination to stand toe-to-toe with anyone. The moment these two teams collided, it was clear sparks were going to fly. Their feud built up throughout 1983, and every match felt bigger than the last. The Wild Samoans would use their brawling tactics, double teaming, and sheer toughness to wear opponents down. But Johnson and Atlas brought a combination of athleticism and resilience that made them different. Fans rallied behind them because they weren't just another team. They represented something fresh and exciting in the tag team division. The rivalry reached its peak on November 15, 1983, when Johnson and Atlas finally defeated the Wild Samoans to capture the WWF Tag Team Championship. That wasn't just a title change, it was history in the making. Johnson and Atlas became the first African-American tag team to ever hold the WWF Tag Team titles, breaking barriers in an era when representation in wrestling was still very limited. It was a moment that went beyond just wrestling. It mattered culturally, and fans felt the weight of it. For the Wild Samoans, losing the belts didn't hurt their legacy. In fact, it only added to the intensity of their feud with the Soul Patrol. Every rematch was heated, every crowd was electric, and you could see just how important these battles were to the tag team scene at the time. Next up, we've got a really fascinating chapter in the Wild Samoan story, their rivalry with Bob Backlund and Pedro Morales. Now, this one was unique because Backlund and Morales weren't a regular tag team. They were two of the biggest singles stars in the WWF at the time. And when they joined forces against the Wild Samoans, it instantly felt like a huge deal. By 1980, the Wild Samoans had already cemented themselves as a dominant force in the WWF tag division. Managed by Captain Lou Albano, they were wild, unpredictable, and nearly unstoppable. But Backlund and Morales, they were the heroes of the WWF. Backlund was the reigning WWF champion, the clean-cut technical wrestler who represented the company with pride. Morales, on the other hand, was one of the most beloved stars of his era, especially adored by fans in New York and other major markets. Putting these two together against Afa and Sika created a clash that fans couldn't wait to see. Their feud heated up quickly, and on August 9, 1980, at Madison Square Garden, Backlund and Morales actually defeated the Wild Samoans to win the WWF Tag Team Championship. That victory was monumental because it wasn't just two stars holding belts. It was a rare case of two world-level singles competitors joining forces to take down one of the most dominant tag teams in the company. The crowd absolutely erupted for it, proving how big of a threat the Wild Samoans had become and how satisfying it was to see them toppled by two fan favorites. But here's where it gets interesting. The reign didn't last long, not because of a loss, but because of WWF's rules at the time. Since Backlund was already the WWF champion, he technically couldn't hold the tag belts too. This meant the titles were vacated, and the Wild Samoans quickly found themselves back in the mix for championship gold. It was classic WWF storytelling. Give the fans a shocking moment, stir up controversy, and then keep the heat alive by putting the belts back in play. What this rivalry did, though, was elevate the Wild Samoans even further. The fact that it took two of the top singles stars in the entire company to beat them, at Madison Square Garden no less, proved just how dangerous they really were. And while the titles didn't stay with Backlund and Morales for long, the feud itself left a lasting impression as one of the more unique and memorable moments in the WWF tag team scene. Moving along, we can't forget about the feud between the Wild Samoans and the unlikely but highly effective team of Junkyard Dog and Dick Murdoch in Mid-South Wrestling during the early 1980s. This rivalry might not always get as much spotlight as their WWF battles, but it was absolutely crucial in building the Wild Samoans' reputation outside the Northeast and proving that they could draw major heat wherever they went. At this time, the Wild Samoans were under the management of the infamous Skandor Akbar. And if you know your wrestling history, you know Akbar was one of the most hated managers in the business. His devastation in Konarkanar stable was all about unleashing chaos, and the Wild Samoans fit right into that mold. They weren't just a team, they were Akbar's wrecking crew, and with him at their side, their dominance felt even more dangerous. On the flip side, you had Junkyard Dog, the top star of Mid-South and one of the most beloved wrestlers in the territory. Fans adored JYD. He had charisma, toughness, and a deep connection with the crowd that few wrestlers could match. Pair him up with Captain Redneck Dick Murdoch, a tough-as-nails brawler who could fight anyone, anytime, and you had a team that was as gritty as they were entertaining. The matches between these two sides were nothing short of wild. The Wild Samoans brought their usual brand of brutality, headbutts, brawling, and double teams that left opponents barely standing. Meanwhile, JYD and Murdoch fought with grit and raw toughness, refusing to back down no matter how much punishment they took. The chemistry was perfect. The Samoans were the villains everyone wanted to see beaten, and JYD and Murdoch were the heroes fans could believe in. The feud was also significant because it showcased just how versatile the Wild Samoans were. They weren't just working the polished WWF style, they could adapt to the rough, hard-hitting world of Mid-South, where matches often felt more like barroom brawls than traditional wrestling contests. And with Skandor Akbar constantly interfering and stirring the pot, the heat on these matches was through the roof. Now let's talk about another big rivalry in the Wild Samoans' WWF run, their battles with Chief Jay Strongbow and Jules Strongbow. This feud was all about pride, toughness, and championship gold. And it gave fans another reason to see just how dangerous Afa and Sika could be inside the ring. The Strongbows were a popular team in the early 80s. Chief Jay Strongbow had been a fixture in the WWF for years, known for his resilience, fighting spirit, and that fiery comeback that always got the crowd on its feet. When paired with Jules Strongbow, the two formed a solid, traditional babyface tag team that fans could rally behind. They weren't flashy, but they were tough, respected, and represented that fighting spirit that fans loved. On the other side, you had the Wild Samoans, still managed by the ever-scheming Captain Lou Albano. By this point, the Samoans had already proven themselves as one of the top tag teams in the WWF, with multiple championship reigns under their belts. Their style was raw and unorthodox, wild headbutts, unpredictable offense, and a chaotic energy that made them feel almost unstoppable. When these two teams clashed, it was the perfect mix of hero versus villain, order versus chaos. The rivalry really heated up in 1983 when the Strongbows managed to hold the WWF Tag Team Championship. For fans, this was a feel-good run, seeing a veteran like Chief Jay get another shot at glory alongside Jules. But the Wild Samoans were not about to let that story end happily. After weeks of build-up, brawls, and heated matches, Afa and Sika finally defeated the Strongbows to capture the titles once again. That victory was especially important because it marked the start of their third and final WWF Tag Team Championship reign. It was a statement win that reminded everyone just how dominant they were in the division. The Strongbows put up a strong fight, but in the end, the sheer power and unpredictability of the Wild Samoans were too much to handle. To round things out, let's talk about the Wild Samoans feud with Adrian Adonis and Dick Murdoch, also known as the North-South Connection. This rivalry came at an interesting point in the Wild Samoans' WWF run because in 1984, they briefly turned face. For a team that had spent years being some of the most hated villains in the company, seeing Afa and Sika on the good guy side of things gave their matches a fresh energy. And who better to feud with than a team as cocky and nasty as Adonis and Murdoch? The North-South Connection had quickly established themselves as one of the top heel teams in the WWF. They were complete opposites in personality. Adrian Adonis with his loud, flashy style, and Dick Murdoch with his rough, no-nonsense toughness. But together, they made an effective and dangerous pairing. Managed by Captain Lou Albano for part of their run, they captured the WWF Tag Team Championship from Rocky Johnson and Tony Atlas, ending the historic reign of the first African-American tag team champions. That alone made them despised by fans and perfect opponents for the Wild Samoans. The feud between these two teams was hard-hitting and gritty, as both sides relied heavily on brawling and brute force. The Samoans, now working as unlikely fan favorites, matched Adonis and Murdoch's aggression with their trademark wild style, headbutts, double teams, and unpredictable offense. What made it fun for fans was seeing the usual villains, Afa and Sika, suddenly fighting from the other side, rallying crowds and standing up to the cocky champions. While the Wild Samoans didn't recapture the belts during this run, their rivalry with Adonis and Murdoch played a big role in keeping the tag team division hot in 1984. Every match had that anything could happen energy, and the contrast in personalities made it entertaining. Adonis and Murdoch had that smug, sneaky heel charisma, while the Wild Samoans had the wild, hard-hitting style that always made them look dangerous. And that wraps up today's video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Today, we're diving into the wild stories of 7 WWE legends who were absolutely terrified of Paul Orndorff. Even some of the biggest names in wrestling found themselves backing off when Orndorff was around. So what exactly did he do that made these legends fear him so much? Let's find out. Hulk Hogan. In the mid-1980s, Hulk Hogan and Paul Orndorff were two of the biggest stars in the WWF. Both were muscular, charismatic, and larger-than-life personalities who embodied the booming era of Hulkamania. But behind their friendship, there was tension simmering beneath the surface. A mix of jealousy, pride, and betrayal that exploded into one of the most memorable feuds of the decade. Initially, Hogan and Orndorff were allies. They teamed up often, fighting off villains like Roddy Piper and Cowboy Bob Orton. Fans loved seeing the two strongmen dominate the ring together. But Orndorff, who had once challenged Hogan for the WWF Championship, started feeling overshadowed by the Hulkster's massive popularity. The turning point came in 1986 on Saturday Night's Main Event. During a tag match, Orndorff called Hogan for help, but was left hanging for a few moments. That small hesitation was enough to push him over the edge. Later, Orndorff shockingly turned on Hogan, clotheslining him and delivering his signature piledriver, a moment that electrified audiences and cemented him as one of the top heels in wrestling. Their feud became white-hot, leading to sold-out arenas and massive TV ratings. The rivalry peaked with the infamous steel cage match on January 3, 1987, where both men escaped the cage at the same time. A rare and dramatic finish that had fans on the edge of their seats. Hogan respected Orndorff's toughness, but admitted he was one of the few opponents he genuinely feared. Orndorff's legit intensity, short temper, and real-life toughness made him dangerous, inside and outside the ring. Even years later, Hogan would recall how Mr. Wonderful blurred the line between fiction and reality, making their feud feel as real as it got. Roddy Piper. Few rivalries in wrestling were as unpredictable as the one between Roddy Piper and Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff. Both men were proud, fiery, and fiercely independent, who didn't like playing second fiddle to anyone. Their clashes in the mid-1980s were less about good versus evil, and more about ego versus ego, a battle of tempers that could explode at any moment. In the early WWF days, Piper and Orndorff often found themselves on the same side. They both despised Hulk Hogan and teamed up to take him down, most notably at the very first WrestleMania in 1985. Piper was the mouthpiece, the loud, trash-talking mastermind, while Orndorff brought the muscle. But when their plan to destroy Hogan and Mr. T backfired, the cracks in their alliance began to show. Piper, furious at losing the spotlight, blamed Orndorff for their defeat. Orndorff didn't take the insult lightly. The two began arguing during interviews and even brawled backstage. On TV, their heated exchange turned physical when Orndorff finally snapped, attacking Piper and severing their partnership in brutal fashion. Their feud reflected their real-life intensity. Both were known for being hot-tempered and stubborn, and many insiders said their animosity wasn't entirely scripted. Orndorff's explosive anger and Piper's relentless sarcasm created genuine tension. What made the rivalry fascinating was that neither man ever truly backed down. They traded insults, punches, and pride, each determined to prove he was the tougher, smarter competitor. In the end, their feud helped establish both as larger-than-life personalities who thrived on confrontation. Piper later admitted Orndorff was one of the few wrestlers he was actually cautious around, not because of fear in the traditional sense, but because Orndorff's temper could ignite in an instant, turning any argument into an all-out fight. The Heenan family, Paul Orndorff's rivalry with Bobby the Brain Heenan and his notorious Heenan family was built on betrayal, bruised pride, and payback. It was one of the most emotionally charged chapters of Orndorff's WWF run. In the mid-1980s, Heenan was managing some of the biggest villains in the WWF, guys like Big John Studd, King Kong Bundy, and later, Andre the Giant. When Heenan added Orndorff to his stable, it seemed like a perfect fit. Orndorff had just turned his back on Hulk Hogan, embracing his darker side, and Heenan promised to take his career to new heights. With Heenan's brains and Orndorff's brawn, the two looked unstoppable. But that partnership didn't last long. Heenan was a master manipulator who liked being in control, and Orndorff wasn't the type to take orders. Their relationship started cracking when Orndorff felt Heenan was using him for money and spotlight rather than respecting him as a true star. Tension built up week after week, with subtle insults and missed opportunities, until it finally exploded on TV. The breaking point came when Heenan called Orndorff a loser after a rare defeat. That one insult triggered Orndorff's infamous temper. In a shocking outburst, he grabbed Heenan by the neck and tossed him around like a rag doll. Fans went wild as the arrogant Mr. Wonderful destroyed his former manager and officially turned babyface again. From then on, the Heenan family made it their mission to destroy him. Orndorff was targeted by Heenan's other clients, but he fought back every time with ferocious intensity. Tito Santana. When Paul Orndorff and Tito Santana crossed paths in the WWF, it wasn't just a regular battle, it was more like war. Tito was one of the most respected baby faces in wrestling, known for his discipline and fighting spirit. Orndorff, on the other hand, was explosive, short-tempered, and unpredictable. Whenever these two met in the ring, fans knew they were in for a fight that felt real, not rehearsed. Their rivalry began after Orndorff's infamous fallout with Bobby Heenan and his gradual shift back toward being a fan favorite. Tito, always standing for fairness and sportsmanship, didn't fully trust Orndorff's change of heart. The tension between them built during tag matches and interviews, where Tito often questioned Orndorff's integrity, calling out his past betrayals and violent temper. Orndorff, never one to take criticism lightly, saw those comments as a personal insult, and things got physical fast. Their matches were stiff, fast-paced, and emotional. Tito's speed and technical skill clashed perfectly with Orndorff's raw power and aggression. In one televised encounter, Orndorff completely lost his cool after Tito out-wrestled him early on. He shoved the referee, screamed at the crowd, and unleashed a vicious assault on Santana, pile-driving him into the mat in a shocking display of rage. The attack drew massive heat from the audience and solidified Orndorff's reputation as one of the most dangerous men in the WWF. Off-screen, Tito respected Orndorff's toughness, but admitted he was cautious around him. Orndorff's temper wasn't an act. He was known for getting heated if things didn't go his way, even in the locker room. Masked superstar, known for his brutal strength, technical skill, and no-nonsense attitude, the masked superstar Bill Eadie was one of the few men who could match Orndorff's intensity. Their rivalry in the early 1980s, especially in the Mid-South and Georgia territories, was a fierce test of willpower between two powerhouse athletes who didn't know how to back down. At that time, Orndorff was rising fast, known for his sculpted physique and explosive temper. The masked superstar, a seasoned veteran, didn't appreciate the young star's cockiness. He saw Orndorff as talented but arrogant, a man who needed to be taught respect. That attitude set the stage for a series of rough, punishing encounters that quickly turned personal. Their matches were not flashy, they were fights. Both men had reputations for working stiff, meaning they hit hard and didn't hold back. Fans could feel the real tension between them as they traded heavy punches and slams that looked, and often were, painfully real. Orndorff's temper sometimes got the better of him, leading to chaotic brawls that spilled out of the ring and into the crowd. What made this rivalry memorable was how evenly matched they were. The masked superstar's methodical style countered Orndorff's fiery aggression perfectly. Each wanted to prove who was the tougher man, not just the better wrestler. Behind the scenes, Even the veteran superstar was said to tread carefully around Orndorff. His short fuse and intimidating presence earned him respect, but also a bit of fear. Their feud helped solidify Orndorff's image as someone who could hold his own against anyone, even the most seasoned and feared competitors in the business. Ric Flair. Flair was the fancy, smooth-talking nature boy, dripping in gold and style, while Orndorff was the intense, no-nonsense powerhouse who didn't care for Flair's show-off. When their paths crossed in the NWA during the early 1980s, it was inevitable that sparks would fly. Flair, the reigning NWA World Heavyweight Champion, was used to opponents treating him with respect. But Orndorff didn't bow to anyone, not even the champion. He went into every encounter with Flair, determined to prove he was the superior athlete and the tougher man. That attitude instantly rubbed Flair the wrong way, leading to a fierce rivalry fueled by ego and mutual disdain. Their matches were hard-hitting and full of tension. Flair tried to frustrate Orndorff with his usual mind games, stalling, taunting, and cheap tricks. But Orndorff didn't play along. He met Flair's arrogance with pure aggression, overpowering him with suplexes, clotheslines, and his devastating piledriver. The contrast between Flair's slick, technical wrestling and Orndorff's brute force style made for compelling encounters that had fans split down the middle. In promos, Flair mocked Orndorff's temper and called him muscles without brains, while Orndorff fired back by calling Flair a coward who hid behind his title and his fancy suits. The verbal jabs added fuel to an already fiery feud, and each match seemed to push Orndorff closer to snapping. Even Ric Flair, known for his bravado, later admitted Orndorff was one of the toughest opponents he ever faced. He respected him, but also feared his intensity. When Paul got mad, Flair once said, "You could see it in his eyes. He wasn't playing anymore." Sting. When Paul Orndorff faced off against Sting in WCW during the early 1990s, it became a moment that no wrestling fan can ever forget. Sting was the bright, energetic face of the company, who connected with fans through his charisma and athleticism. Orndorff, by then a seasoned veteran, was grittier, meaner, and carried the chip of a man who'd been to the top and wasn't ready to step aside. The tension between them reflected more than just a storyline. It symbolized old-school toughness versus new-era flash. Their rivalry ignited when Orndorff aligned himself with Paul Roma as Pretty Wonderful, one of WCW's most arrogant tag teams. They saw Sting as everything they despised, a fan favorite who got cheers without having to fight for respect the hard way. Orndorff, in particular, took that personally. He openly mocked Sting's popularity, calling him a poster boy, not a wrestler. That attitude led to several heated confrontations, both in tag matches and singles bouts. In the ring, Orndorff brought a ruthless, punishing style that contrasted sharply with Sting's high-energy offense. Matches between the two often started with technical wrestling, but quickly broke down into brawls, with Orndorff's temper taking over. He would use cheap shots, distractions, and brutal pile drivers to try to slow down Sting's momentum. Fans could feel the real resentment behind Orndorff's attacks. He wanted to prove he still belonged at the top. At one point, Orndorff and Roma feuded with Sting and his partner, Dustin Rhodes, in a heated tag team rivalry that became one of WCW's highlights in 1994. Their matches were physical and unpredictable, with Orndorff often trying to injure Sting to make a statement. Behind the scenes, Sting respected Orndorff, but admitted he was intimidating. And that wraps up today's video. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you never miss our latest uploads. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye. Today we're talking about 5 wrestlers Nikita Koloff just could not stand, and trust me, every single one of these has a crazy story behind it. You're definitely not ready for this, so sit back, buckle up, and let's jump right into it. Let's kick things off with Magnum TA, because honestly, when you talk about Nikita Koloff's most heated rivalries, this one has to be near the very top. Their feud in 1986 wasn't just another wrestling storyline. It was personal, it was emotional, and it left fans glued to their TVs week after week. At that time, Magnum TA was the ultimate all-American babyface. He was charismatic, good-looking, and had that fiery intensity in the ring that made fans rally behind him. On the other side, you had Nikita Koloff, the Russian nightmare, who wasn't just playing a character, he was living it. With his thick accent, his raw power, and his cold demeanor, he became one of the most believable and intimidating villains in all of wrestling. The clash between these two personalities felt like more than just wrestling. It tapped into the Cold War tensions of the 80s, making it feel like America versus Russia, good versus evil, in the squared circle. The rivalry truly reached its peak during their best-of-7 series for the NWA United States Heavyweight Championship. Now, this wasn't just any feud gimmick. The idea of a best-of-7 was huge at the time because it meant fans were going to see two of the best go at it over and over until only one man was left standing. Every single match was filled with drama, hard-hitting action, and that constant back and forth where you really couldn't predict who was going to take the win. Nikita brought his raw strength, while Magnum brought his heart and determination, and together they created some of the most intense matches of the decade. Next up, we've got the American Dream Dusty Rhodes. And let me tell you, this one is really special because it wasn't just a rivalry, it eventually turned into one of the most surprising alliances in wrestling history. Back in the mid-80s, Dusty Rhodes was the guy. He was the people's champion, the working man's hero, and every time he grabbed the microphone, fans hung on to every word. On the other side, you had Nikita Koloff, the cold, intimidating Russian nightmare, who had no problem tearing through anyone in his path. Naturally, these two were destined to collide, and when they did, sparks flew. Their rivalry was intense because you had Dusty representing heart, grit, and the voice of the common man, while Koloff was seen as this unstoppable foreign powerhouse who was almost impossible to crack. For a long time, their feud was brutal. They fought in singles matches, tag team battles, and all kinds of heated confrontations that kept the crowds hot. But the story didn't just stop at them being enemies. Wrestling fans know that sometimes the best rivalries can flip on their head, and that's exactly what happened here. In 1986, Magnum TA, Dusty's close friend and one of the biggest rising stars, suffered that tragic car accident that ended his career far too soon. This shook the entire wrestling world, and in the storyline, it opened the door for something nobody ever expected. Nikita Koloff stepping away from being Dusty's bitter rival and actually joining forces with him. That moment was massive. Fans were shocked to see Koloff, who had been booed out of arenas for years, suddenly standing side by side with Rhodes. But it worked, because the respect between the two felt genuine and the timing was perfect. From there, Koloff and Dusty became one of the most talked about alliances of the era. Together, they turned their focus on the notorious Four Horsemen, led by Ric Flair. And if you know anything about 80s wrestling, you know how big of a deal that was. The Horsemen were dominant, ruthless, and always looking to crush anyone in their way. But with Dusty and Nikita teaming up, the playing field felt a little more balanced. So in the end, Dusty Rhodes went from being one of Koloff's fiercest rivals to one of his greatest allies. And that twist made their story unforgettable. And now we move on to the nature boy Ric Flair. Because let's be real, if you were a top star in the NWA during the 80s, crossing paths with Flair was almost a guarantee. He was the man, the centerpiece of the company, the world heavyweight champion who carried himself like the ultimate heel, dripping in arrogance, custom-made suits, and all the swagger in the world. And on the other side, you had Nikita Koloff, this cold powerhouse of a wrestler who looked like he was carved out of stone. So when these two collided, the stakes couldn't get any higher. Koloff was always presented as a serious threat to Flair's title. While a lot of guys would play mind games with Ric or try to match him technically, Nikita brought something totally different. Raw, brute strength. That's what made their matches so fascinating. You had Flair, the master technician, who could make anyone look like $1,000,000, going up against a guy who looked like he could genuinely crush you with a single clothesline. It was power versus strategy, muscle versus finesse, and the fans ate it up. Flair being Flair, of course, would always find a way to hold on to the belt, whether it was by cheating, stalling, or slipping out with a count out. But the important part wasn't just who walked away with the championship. It was how real those battles felt. Fans genuinely believed that Nikita Koloff could be the man to end Flair's reign. Every time Nikita hoisted Flair up or nailed him with that sickening Russian sickle, the crowd gasped like they were about to witness history. And here's what makes it even more interesting. These clashes weren't just about titles. They fed into the larger storylines of the NWA at the time. Flair wasn't just champion, he was the leader of the Four Horsemen, the most dominant faction in wrestling. So every time Koloff went after Flair, it wasn't just one-on-one. You knew the Horsemen would be lurking around, ready to interfere, tip the scales, and protect their golden boy. That constant tension made every Koloff-Flair match feel unpredictable. Now we've got to talk about one of the most brutal rivalries of Nikita Koloff's early career. His battles alongside Ivan Koloff against none other than the Road Warriors, Animal and Hawk. If you know anything about tag team wrestling in the 80s, you already know this feud was as intense as it gets. When Nikita first burst onto the scene, he was paired with his uncle, Ivan Koloff, forming the powerhouse duo known as the Koloffs. Together, they were dominant, using sheer strength, aggression, and that cold Russian mystique to tear through opponents. But standing in their way were the Road Warriors, one of the most feared tag teams in wrestling history. Hawk and Animal weren't just big, they were intimidating, face-painted monsters who wrecked everyone in their path. Fans loved them, and promoters knew that pitting them against the Koloffs was guaranteed chaos. Their feud quickly became legendary because it felt like a true clash of titans. You didn't have flashy wrestling or technical showcases here. What you had were four absolute powerhouses beating the life out of each other in the ring. The Koloffs brought that methodical, punishing style, while the Road Warriors were all about explosive energy and raw aggression. Together, it was a recipe for matches that looked and felt like wars. One of the biggest highlights of this rivalry came as they fought over both the NWA and AWA Tag Team Championships. These weren't just title matches. They were statements about who the toughest, meanest, most dominant team in wrestling really was. The stakes were always high, the crowds were always electric, and the matches were filled with wild brawls that spilled outside the ring, stiff shots that looked way too real, and that constant feeling that somebody might not walk out in one piece. The beauty of this feud was that it elevated Nikita early in his career. Going toe-to-toe with the Road Warriors, who were already established as nearly unbeatable, showed fans that Koloff was the real deal. He wasn't just riding Ivan's coattails, he was proving himself as one of the toughest competitors in the business. Finally, we've got to talk about the Four Horsemen, because once Nikita Koloff turned face, this became one of the biggest and most defining rivalries of his career. The Horsemen, Ric Flair, Arn Anderson, Ole Anderson, Tully Blanchard, and later guys like Lex Luger and Barry Windham, were the most dominant faction in wrestling during the 80s. They had the gold, they had the swagger, and they had the numbers game down to perfection. If you crossed one Horseman, you basically had the whole crew breathing down your neck. After Magnum TA's tragic accident and Nikita's shocking alliance with Dusty Rhodes, fans were ready to see something big, and that's where the Horsemen came in. Dusty was already knee-deep in a bitter war with Flair and company, and when Nikita joined forces with him, the fight only got hotter. This was no small-time feud. This was the centerpiece storyline of the NWA at the time. What made it so special was the way the teams matched up. On one side, you had the Horsemen, the arrogant, ruthless heels who would do anything to keep control. On the other, you had Dusty, Koloff, and often the Road Warriors, creating this powerhouse alliance that looked like they could actually take down the Empire. When these groups collided, the matches were wild. Tag wars, steel cage battles, and of course, the legendary War Games matches, which were practically designed for a feud like this. Nikita shined in this rivalry because it gave him the chance to prove himself as more than just a Russian villain. He became a fan favorite who fought alongside America's hero, Dusty Rhodes, and he threw himself into brutal battles with the Horsemen like he had something to prove. Whether it was trading stiff shots with Arn Anderson, standing toe-to-toe with Tully Blanchard, or going after Ric Flair himself, Koloff looked like he belonged at the very top of the card. The feud also helped cement the Four Horsemen as the villains of professional wrestling. They weren't just feuding with one man, they were fighting the biggest stars in the company, and Nikita Koloff was right there in the thick of it. And that's a wrap for today's video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned for more. We'll catch you in the next one. Take care.